Soundstripe.
Welcome to today's episode of Heels in the Hierarchy. I'm SJ.
And I'm Pegsy. What are we talking about today?
Today we are looking at a reflection piece, which I'm quite excited about, because actually we've just completed our series 3, which is amazing. And I hope you, as our listeners, have been enjoying joining us on this journey. Again, before we start, please remind us to download, share, follow us on TikTok and our Instagram, and share as much as you can. I think this is what keeps us going. It helps us grow. You know, this community is really important to us in order to just have more and more discussions about women, work and leadership. So we're going to reflect on the whole of series 3, and hopefully you'll be coming and maybe learning a bit more about behind the scenes. I don't know.
Yeah. I think it's important for us to reflect on what we've done on these previous episodes, not least because often we record something and events have moved on. So one of the episodes, in fact, the first one is International Men's Day. We've got International Women's Day coming up. But in a lot of the episodes, we talk about things that are current affairs, current situations in our lives, anything like that. And of course, times do change quite rapidly. So I enjoy the reflection side of it because it provides a full stop to the series, but also it gives us an opportunity to update on any developments since the individual episodes were recorded.
Yeah. I think I'm just trying to reflect on our reflections on it, and sometimes you can I'm just like, we have actually covered quite a lot of areas in this series.
Yeah.
Often we are quite, what's the word I'm looking for, we have quite similar perspectives on what we want to talk about, and I think this one is slightly different to, if we look back on series 2, it's a lot around wellbeing, mental health, expect like that kind of emotional intelligence, whereas this series has been quite varied in terms of relevant topics, like you're saying. So our first episode was International Men's Day, and I remember the discussion around my son coming home and my daughter coming home and telling me that there was such a thing, and they talked about it in school, and then we had that discussion of going, okay, that's interesting. Why do they need the specific day? And I remember that discussion being quite around needing to do that and helping us to explore that men need a space to be celebrated in a different way as well.
Yeah. I did start wondering, do we really need an International Men's Day? I felt, not in a sort of anti-male way, but the world has evolved to be quite a male-dominated environment. And even in 2026, as we are now, there's still a lot of work that needs to be done to provide more equity for women in a variety of situations around the world. But do we actually really need to celebrate or commemorate an International Men's Day? But as part of the research that we did for the episode and part of our discussions, the thing that it really changed my thinking, it was about highlighting the mental health challenges that men face, actually the fact that men themselves are navigating a changing landscape because of things getting more equitable for women, but also just some of the social and economic and emotional challenges that they're facing. Technology, social media challenges, all those sorts of things. I thought that was really quite a fascinating episode.
I think it's healthy, I think, as well, as we create, especially a specific, I never say that word, podcast around women, leadership, etc., that actually we are bringing in another perspective sometimes. So I think that was useful for us to reflect, not just about our perspective and around what the data was saying, but also enabling us to actually think a bit differently of going, this is just as important to have a different perspective, and actually we need to be allies to them as well in terms of our children. We always talk about the other way around, that we want to be, empowering women, but also, we all have partners and people that we know that have important male roles in their lives. And, that element of what we talked about with There was a lot of sportsmen that we talked about in the episode of how useful it is to have, because you talked about social media, didn't you, just a second ago, but very much around them being real good role models. And it's not necessarily about the people that you see in your immediate circle, although that's helpful, but having more and more accessibility to males in social media talking about their struggles, and how that can mirror having discussions and being more open around things like anxiety, performance, stress, how that's opening a door for other people to have permission to talk.
I think also we have this tendency as women, this need really to fight against preconceptions. And yet at the same time, we have our own preconceptions about men. And one of our preconceptions is that, you know, they're sort of strong, they've got all these opportunities, they embrace the opportunities, they have all sorts of confidence and things like that. And actually, we do know, as you said, from our own experiences of men within our various sort of circles that we interact with, that they're not necessarily open about emotions and challenges. They're not necessarily open about an unfamiliar world that they're trying to navigate, like us, on a daily basis. And that they don't necessarily have their own support networks out there. So how can we encourage them to either share with women or to find other men to share with and to open up conversations with them, particularly since those sort of gender differences are not always best dealt with by sharing some of the challenges with women.
I think it's just, that feedback in terms of my learning from that is, it was, you know, we know it's out there, we know people struggle, but I think it was just highlighting the percentages of people that wouldn't necessarily talk about it, but also the movement of the needle of people in different sectors. In terms of, we talked about sport, we talked about film, we talked about other people that were being so authentic, and the tips that obviously as leadership and managers about being aware of making those conversations accessible to all who we work with, and making it a conversation that we want to be curious about, rather than shying away from it because of our own preconceptions, isn't it? So really, it helped me to take a moment, I think, also in terms of our own perspectives and how I would want to talk to, you know, my nephews and my son around being open and making it okay.
Yeah. And then our second episode was continuing professional development. And inevitably, there are some overlaps with confidence that men certainly present with over their own professional capabilities compared to women who tend to underplay a particular skill or capability. But in that, we were mostly focusing on whether or not there is a drive in society, whether or not that drive is valid, for us to always have additional qualifications in order to prove our capabilities and to progress up the career ladder. It's always something that I've been a sort of an advocate of, is something that is called QBE, qualified by experience. And I understand that there is a value in getting a qualification in a given subject because there is an objective measure of competence against other people who have undertaken the same form of assessment. So it gives a benchmark for people objectively, like recruiters and employers and line managers, to know that a particular skills threshold has been met. But by the same token, my frustration is on the fact that that then perpetuates the need to get a qualification. And because women don't have the same level of confidence about men regarding their skill set, they're constantly chasing those qualifications. But actually, the qualified by experience competence should reduce the dependency on qualifications. And I just sort of wanted to celebrate that in this discussion.
I feel like I'm learning a bit more even in this discussion. I think you just sparked my thinking of going, because I remember talking about it in the episode around why do we do this to ourselves?
Yeah.
And the cultural, I suppose, the entrenchedness, that's not even a word, but I'm making it a word.
You've got a unique ability to make brand new words. It's a rare skill.
You got to love
celebrated.
dyslexia. But it is around, we embody the culture that we don't want, but yet we create.
Yeah.
So that whole point of you're talking about needing certificates and chasing that to prove ourselves. But I remember having a discussion around how CVs and interviews and the way that we would want to portray ourselves, knowing that we have the capabilities, but we wouldn't necessarily put that on our papers or our CVs or statements. Whereas statistically, there is a difference between people being able to oversell themselves, whereas we would not necessarily, we would have to make sure that we have absolutely every competence or requirement to go for a role, for example. And that element of, why do we do that to ourselves? We want to be able to progress, but we sometimes hold ourselves back.
Yeah.
But then what does the impact of that do to the people that we support? And, we want to empower people to grow in their roles.
Yeah.
And that is why professional development exists, to enable people to grow, or even not necessarily grow in terms of what does that look like for a new role, but more in terms of developing their scope within their role as an expert, like you were saying. But the restraints in that as well, because either down to funding or you've got to self-fund, there's always elements around, I think we talked a bit about coaching and how that could be kind of really supported. And obviously, as a therapist, that, in terms of supervision, there's certain frameworks which we have to adhere to. But your point around having been expert by experience is something that I see in some companies, absolutely. Then people will go to certain people because they know they've got the knowledge and experience, and they wouldn't even question, I need proof for that. I feel that it's more maybe for interviews or progression rather than as business as usual. That's CPD.
I think also, the gathering of the qualification for itself, and it's something we spoke of in the episode, is all well and good, but there are people who get that qualification, get that certificate, and basically either never read the book on the subject or never practice the skill ever again. And yet there are people who have become incredibly knowledgeable about a subject, and it unleashes a passion in them and an enthusiasm and a continuous improvement. It's almost like when you think about a job description, the essential criteria, the qualification, and the desirable criteria, actually that's the bit, that's where the richness kind of is, if we think about it in
totally
those
right.
terms.
Yeah. Especially when you're talking to someone, you don't go, what are you qualified in? You don't really talk about that. What you want to know is their stories, and stories are empowering and experience is empowering. And we are, when we look at an episode later on, we talk about interviews, don't we? And actually being able to think about how we should be reframing from experience and talking and asking examples of real life elements, because otherwise, like you say, you can have doesn't matter how many qualifications are, it's all theory until you put it into practice, isn't it? So yeah, I think that's always quite a interesting debate. And I'm always interested to our listeners to see what your perspectives are. So, please continue to engage with us and let us know what's your experience of career development versus qualifications. Our next episode was in terms of our TED Talk. So we always try and put a TED Talk in there because I think it's really important to, like you said at the beginning, be up to date about what things are happening and seeing where the gaps are in terms of where we are trying to talk about women in leadership. But actually, why I think we've both found this quite powerful, and obviously you will need to say a bit more about what the TED Talk is about, but it was very much around why it struck us was about going back to the source and looking at our younger generation in order to try and change that narrative for the women of the future, isn't it?
Yeah. Well, this was the episode that, in fact, you found, didn't you, SJ? And this was by someone called Gail Deschamps. And she had developed a lead her approach. And the focus of that was a way to encourage girls to not lose their interest in leadership during adolescence. And she was really focusing on the fact that leadership needs to start early, particularly in pre-adolescent and adolescent girls who lose a lot of their confidence as they start to develop their identity in womanhood and almost downplay any inherent or developing skills that they've had up until that point.
Mm.
And it's to try and find teachable moments when we engage with prepubescent, pubescent and young adolescent females.
That was
and
a wordful, isn't it?
Yeah.
That was a mouthful, bless you.
But finding teachable moments without necessarily overtly making them. I'm just in the middle of this argument. I'm just going to do a teachable moment. But it's finding those opportunities because it's important to build confidence in young women at that time as a stepping stone to their future careers.
It's interesting because I say interesting a lot, listeners, you'll hear this. But I had a conversation with a few of my daughter's friends and people that I know who are teenage age. And I was talking about the episode that we just talked about and some of her findings and how they were, exploring how to utilize skills. And it was so interesting because the response was just validating everything that the research was showing, that actually, when I asked them about career aspirations, role models, anything around leadership or management or tech, for example, or anything that's in everything was, no, I'm not interested. And I asked them a bit more questions and it was, they didn't see it. They couldn't see it because there was no one mirroring that, no one having conversations about it. All their things around GCSEs and A-levels was very subject mattered, but around English and maths, less around the, what would you call it? They're not soft skills, they're leadership skills, they're management skills, the business skills. None of that was being taught at that age, which is what this research was around, about how would you have conversations to encourage them. And I then challenged them to ask and say, if there was representation, to have conversations and think about what a leader would look like and how you could shift the narrative and being entrepreneurs or thinking about something that wasn't there, would you do it? And it was so interesting because none of them said no, but none of them said yes. It was almost that no one's asked me these kind of questions before. And that was a bit of a light bulb moment in my life to go, I've got a responsibility to not just have conversations about it, but be more intentional in my circles of influence. And I think that's what she was saying as well, that we've all got a responsibility, haven't we, to do that?
Yeah. When we look at those in an educational setting, one of the things that I think people would sort of come back to us with would be to say, well, the girls do have an opportunity to do subjects that are leaning towards business studies, for example, positioning them for business studies skills as A-levels or if they go to sixth form college and university. However, one of the things that I think this episode really highlights is that leadership is actually a life skill and shouldn't be separated out as a business skills
like framework.
Yeah. This is a life skill. And the reason that it's really important as a life skill is that the thing that Gail Deschamps talks about is leading by example, asking probing questions, and developing confidence in speaking.
Giving them platforms, isn't it?
Yeah.
To do that. And then navigating. I thought that was really interesting. And navigating the difficult conversations and how would you want to reframe it and how to do that. So then you're critically thinking, not just a subject, but actually the interpersonal skills, which is so
Yeah.
relevant when it comes to life skills, which you're absolutely right. And I would absolutely recommend all our listeners to go back to the episode, because the link's in there, isn't it?
Yeah. To the
To
TED
be able
Talk.
to look at it for yourselves, have a perspective, and see, could you probably have more to have a discussion and think about. So we'd love to hear your perspective on that, and actually how can we continue to do that more. Our next one really was, we had a interview. We had our guest speaker,
Yeah. Yeah. Audrey.
Audrey. She was amazing. And yeah, do you want to talk a
Yeah.
bit more?
She is an assistant associate head teacher. That wasn't an original career choice when she left school. Like a lot of people, I think, didn't necessarily have a career path mapped out, but also even as she sort of matured and started to consider that she had something to offer, didn't necessarily immediately have the confidence to publicly say that this is a career path that she wanted to go on. And in fact, when she did finally grasp the nettle and start her study journey, which didn't even start with teacher training, but developing the foundational skills before going on to teacher training, didn't even share with her immediate family that she was going on that path, and actually sort of snuck out and did evening classes.
I mean, I can't believe, I would never be able to just, I'm terrible at keeping secrets. So, I mean, I'm great as a therapist, but in my personal life, I think my face says it all.
Yeah.
But what was interesting about in this case with Audrey, it was her own journey. It was so
Yeah.
fascinating to see and have real discussions around not only just the challenges, but it was a personal growth. It was,
Yeah.
the reasons for her were so personal, wanting to develop that it was, she needed to go on that journey in order to be able to then share what she's
Yeah.
accomplished. And she's so humble as well.
Yeah. She did share quite soon afterwards, but I think it was her absolute need to prove to herself that she was legitimately there for a couple of weeks doing these additional courses before she then shared and was supported at home with that. But there was an awful lot about a continuing thread of self-doubt, even once she was qualified as a teacher. When she started her journey onto an assistant head teacher, each step of that journey was, well, I'm not really sure if I could. And definitely the support that she was given by peers in particular, that sort of reticence, is that the right word? That nervousness, I guess it is the right word, but that, holding back slightly before then sort of saying, okay, I'll give it a go. That I found was really fascinating.
But that, again, I remember having the discussion, I think how interesting it is that, again, the same common threads, no matter what episode we tend to be doing, goes back to entrenched cultural beliefs that it's difficult for us to just embody being empowered and owning your qualities and needing permission to be able to grow or take it, because it could be seen as pride or it could be seen as something. It's always seen about something. It's perception all the time, isn't it?
Yeah.
And how important it is as we continue to grow our community that it's not about being better than each other, but changing the narrative about us empowering and encouraging and owning our strengths.
Yeah.
And I remember having that discussion about, finally, even now, she's so humble, not recognizing that actually that journey is a continual one.
Yeah.
That you're never quite there, but only just starting to see how that can have a massive impact to everyone that's watched her on a journey, people that she's interacted with. I absolutely, love the episodes when we're interviewing or having conversations.
My goodness. Yeah.
It's so, for me, so enriching I love stories anyway, but just to hear someone's stories, but see the different elements of what shapes them, what pivotal moments happen, they're so teachable moments for us, let alone what the audience must be taking. And it's always an honor
Yeah.
for that. So I am, again, I'd really encourage people to go back, and I've listened to it a few times now because there's so much in those conversations of
Oh,
what she's sharing.
absolutely. Yeah.
So it's definitely one of my highlights, I think,
Yeah.
in this one.
Yeah. Our Q&A episode, which was the very first time we sort of ventured into having people submit questions and us to discuss them afterwards. It was good fun doing it, and I was pleased that we did that first sort of listener questions. But of course, we had some technical difficulties.
Oh,
And the sound was so frustrating, but we thought, it's
we
to
can't
your
not,
point
yeah,
about being authentic and,
yeah, we can't
you
be
know,
perfectionists. And
yeah,
so I'm hoping that our listeners will have grace. We will absolutely do another one of those episodes
yeah,
of putting questions out there for people to share experiences and stories, and
yeah.
as for us to discuss that perspectives. I still hope that people will be able to take the essence of that, because actually, again, it was interesting that we have completely different walks of life coming with the same experiences, or
Mm,
very, very similar experiences, whether it's that people don't take them seriously, whether they had higher qualifications. It's, again, very much around perspectives and cultural norms around perceptions, the fact that women juggle everything and still need to be
mm,
perfectionists, whereas our male counterparts can just be and be able to perform well, where we have to justify everything. So there did seem to be the same unconscious biased conversations,
mm.
and there were completely different parts of work life, wasn't it? You
Well,
couldn't even get. It was really, thank you for our listeners for sharing them, because it was really difficult to pick between them.
yeah, well, I mean, the thing I thought was really interesting was that we had questions from the beauty industry, from manufacturing, from the public sector. And yet, as you said, SJ, there were the sort of like the subtle misogyny, the lack of confidence, the mental challenge of multitasking, balancing work and home life, and lack of self-confidence.
But I
And
think, yeah, again, about we always love to use the word interesting.
yeah, I'm gonna
I'm going
say,
to start saying curious a bit more, really curious, and then using our words. So again, yeah, we apologise for the quality, but we did not want to share it because actually had some really great takeaways, and it was, user engagement, and we would love to have more of those in terms of Q&A and sharing your stories, because I think that then helps bring a different perspective of your experiences.
yeah,
And then finally, we finished our series on New Year's resolutions.
which we published deliberately in February. We recorded it at the time, but we thought, you know what, we're going to hold this episode back until February, because that's the time when people perhaps start reflecting on the effectiveness of their New Year resolutions.
Or I've
But
completely stopped and forgot they even made one.
yeah, yeah, yeah. And there's something about February. I know a lot of people don't like February. I think it's a really lovely month. But for me, the days start getting a little bit longer, and there's a sense of spring not too far around the corner. And I think in our discussion when we were talking about the ideal time to release that episode, it just felt right, because the weight of January and New Year's resolutions is finished in February. Whether you complete the month having successfully met a challenge that you've set yourself or not, there's still a weight in February that can hang over us.
I'm just wondering what and how your New Year's resolution is.
Well, if you remember from the episode, I actually started my New Year resolution in
November.
November. And I made the choice to do it and thought, actually, I'm not going to wait. And for me, as we discuss in the episode, 1st of January is just arbitrary as a date. And that was my decision to give up alcohol. And actually, funny point on that, I would always go to a New Year's Eve party. So I couldn't actually start my New Year resolution until the 2nd of January in any year. And almost every year for the last, I think probably 10 years, I decided to give up alcohol in January. And then I'd get to the 6th of January and go out for lunch and have a glass of wine, and then forgot that I'd given up alcohol.
I think a lot of other listeners will probably have done the same. Yeah. So you're okay there.
So I gave up alcohol on the 7th of November. So on the date of recording this, really, really close to 3 months of not drinking.
You've done incredibly well.
With any resolution, whether it's a New Year resolution or not, it's not necessarily about completing the journey, but if it's something that you choose to do for the right reasons, even if it doesn't work out on this occasion and you try again later the same year or again next year, doesn't mean to say that because you've had to try again and again and again, that's necessarily a bad thing. I always talk about the stars aligning. And when the stars align, it just seems to work.
I remember when we were doing the episode, what was really interesting is, when you go back to work, or if, you talk about either New Year's resolution or how was your Christmas or what was going on, and you kind of share the dramas, and then it kind of leaves there. But actually what was quite nice is that we continue to think about it in a perspective of, well, how do we have self-compassion? Because you obviously said some people may give up, some people doesn't. That's why we wanted to do it and launch it in February, because we wanted people to reflect on the episode, but also to encourage people, even in this episode, to not be self-loathing, but have some self-compassion, be able to check in on other people after the month that they've had, what's going on, what's their well-being. And actually as a leader or a woman in work, I love that acronym WOOP that you brought in around wish, outcome, obstacle, plan, because it kind of brings it back to, yes, a work perspective, but also you need something that you want to do, not just because you feel it's the right thing to do, but as a leader, you want to be able to support. It's a great method. It's accountable. It's got some great tips in there, and it helps to build psychological safety, so then people can reach their goals that they want to in a easier way that isn't just about a work plan or a strategy, but specific goals that's useful. So I thought that was really lovely how you entwined all of that.
But also, if you like, New Year's resolutions or resolutions, they're continuous improvement approaches. And the reason that I liked the WOOP method was that it was a way of introducing a sort of supportive framework to help people with self-improvement. We introduced it on the back of an episode that was about New Year's resolutions and how to support your team with the successful achievement of those resolutions. But in the context of continuous improvement, this is a great mechanism as a leadership and management tool to help your team to continuously improve.
Yeah. And my mind just went, because I was too excited for the big news we have for our listeners. So I hope you enjoyed series 3. I hope you go back and take bits of information and tips that you can take into work, have conversation with your girlfriends and partners and, those who you would listen to and empower and encourage. Continue to please share, download, follow us on all your socials. Let other people know that we're here, because, we are here to empower, to support, to have honest, authentic conversations about women, work, leadership, and fill that gap between we're not at the top of our game, but we're all on a journey that we want to empower everybody else to come along with us. And so part of that, and we've talked about it in our first series, was very much around pushing ourselves out of the comfort zone.
Yeah.
Mainly because I think we want to continue our own growth and our own development, and we're always growing. All the skills that we've had to learn to create this podcast is so much behind the scenes. You see the final product, but Pegsy and I have been on such a long journey over the last year, probably 18 months, to ensure that we're creating good content, that we are developing our own skill set, and also taking ourselves out of the comfort zone. So be part of this community. And our real ask is to download and share, because it's the only way we can grow, and in order for us to continue what we're doing, and engage with us, because we want to know who our community are. We want to be having authentic conversations, and we want more of those Q&As. So hopefully you've really enjoyed series 3. Until then,
keep your heels high
and your standards higher. Yay! Whoop, whoop.